So that you understand, I'm holding this. It makes no difference to what you can hear, but apparently it's so that it gets recorded. So, so that's what's going on. But I will faithfully hold this. Well, of course, you've just had a very, very interesting discussion or this presentation, which is very moving. And we were trying to decide in the speakers room before how we're going to link it with what I'm going to talk about. But I think you're quite used to the fact that you've had talks which aren't necessarily terribly linked with each other, even though they may be around the same topic. But in this particular case, there is a link. For those of you who can tell accents, you may have already realized that I'm Greek. Greek-born, married here, so I stayed here, studied in the UK. And of course, it is Greece which is the main recipient of all these migrants who are coming in. And I think there is an issue when we think about the various members of society and how they're being discriminated against and so on. I think the interesting thing is that Greece has gone through a humanitarian crisis of its own with a very sharp reduction in GDP over the last few years. About a quarter of its GDP has disappeared. And in the process, we've had all these migrants coming in from Eastern Europe and elsewhere. And the society has become quite concerned about this. So what you've seen across Europe is the emergence of sort of right-wing tendencies where they don't like migrants, where even in the UK here, we're talking about leaving Europe because we don't want this free movement of people to take place. And I think this migration crisis has impacted very significantly on all this. But it also raises the fact that people, various bits of the community, think of themselves a bit differently to others and what's coming in particular, but also as we are around us when we look at the various members of society, because you can distinguish between those who are not very well educated and those who end up committing crimes and going to prison. You can look at women and look at them differently than you do with men, and it's really about this that I wanted to talk about, thinking about this underlying crisis that we have to come back to when we have the question and answer session in a few minutes. So I want to talk to you about whether society is fair in terms of how it looks at particular areas of society. And of course, from a business perspective, we've always said that diversity is a good thing. That for those of you who are studying the subject, particularly looking at multinational companies, you will know that a diverse board, for example, or a diverse workforce, which represents a lot more the interests or represents actually the population that you serve, does better. There's quite a lot of evidence that suggests that if you do have a diverse board, particularly if you have more women on the board, you tend as a company to do better than if you don't. And there is a push from many countries and also from the European Commission itself to have quotas for women so that a target is achieved on the boardrooms at least, so that there is more diversity when you're making any decisions, so the decisions are better, so companies perform better, but it is mainly done from a fairness perspective. It is, after all, right that if we're looking at women who are a majority, after all, that they should also be properly represented in high positions in firms and also in politics, in the law, in the judicial system more generally, in universities, in terms of heads of colleges, heads of departments, in hospitals, but they're not. And that's the interesting thing. If you look at the UK, for example, executive positions held by women form just under 10% of all the senior positions which are held in companies, in the larger companies in the UK, which is appalling. It's moved in the last 10 years from 6% to just under 10%. Hardly any change. You'd wonder, what is society losing by not using that talent? After all, women right now in the UK, but it happens in many places in Europe as well, tend to be better educated than the men. They achieve more at university. I'm sorry about the voice in this class. But they do. They enter university now in larger numbers. And when they enter the workforce, that's a very interesting thing, they actually earn a bit more than the male equivalents. And then they lose that, mainly because they go off and have children. Motherhood stops the equality of women throughout their lives. If you take any time off to have a child, you don't get promoted, you can never come back, and in most cases, you can't come back and get back to your earlier salary levels, or even achieve the rights that you wanted, that you were on before, in terms of this land that you started. And that is because quite a lot of women don't see the ability to come back to work and work in the way that they'd like to work themselves. It's fine for companies to say, we don't discriminate. We treat everyone the same. If everyone can treat the same means working 86 hours a week and being free as a woman to go to lap dancing class, clubs in the evening if you want to, or spend the weekend playing golf, like the men do, well, you can't do that if you're a woman, you have a child, or more than one. And I have 5, and I know the difficulty of doing so. So what you need to do is change the way in which businesses operate. Because I already said, if you have women in senior positions, you make much better judgments, better decisions. There's been very interesting research done by psychologists who looked at the financial crisis. What was happening at a time when so many men took so many risks with other people's money. And then, of course, it all crashed. And what they found is that the testosterone in men, encourages them to be very optimistic about their ability to beat the market. Of course, they're wrong, because you can't beat the market for any reasonable time. If everyone has the same knowledge, unless you have insider knowledge, which of course is illegal, you can't really beat the market for any length of time. The women have more logic, are slightly calmer, they think a little bit harder, and they tend to know that, from just minding people around them, that things aren't as simple as the men think they are. And of course, we've been hearing about wars. I suspect we wouldn't have all these wars if women were running the world. And why do I say that? Everyone has always thought that from the ancient Greeks onwards. We had this incredibly amazing playwrights in ancient Greece who, one of them suggested that, in fact, this is how the play went, that the women would withdraw from sex, from their men, unless they stopped going to war. And it worked. But that's one way. The other way would be to really run things so that you wouldn't go to war in the first place. But we are losing out from an economic perspective. Because, of course, we've invested so much on women. And they've got the skills that are available. And then they come back, when they do, after having a child, normally, if they want to work part-time, or if they go back anyway but want to have some flexibility, working at levels that are below the skill level. And that affects productivity and growth. And it affects productivity and growth throughout their lives. And the economies, of course, suffer. So my view is that the only way to get around this is to have quotas for senior positions, which of course then will change the way the culture of an organization is. Because the pay gap that exists the moment you hit your 30s, you women should be listening, is absolutely enormous. As I said, it's almost non-existent at the beginning. By the time you're 39, it will be more than 20%, if not 30%. And that is huge. Even if you look at the city itself, bonuses that women receive are lower than the men. High-level pay is lower than the men. So unless you force it, it's not going to happen, and the economy and everyone will be losing out. Now this is about women generally. There's one subcategory of women that I will cover in the next couple of minutes. And this is the women who end up going to prison. The most extraordinary thing is it's not the women, it's also the men. It's predominantly the case for women. They tend to be undereducated. They are vulnerable in the sense that they have tended to be sexually abused when they were younger. 50% of women who go to prison have been subjected to domestic violence. Very many of them are lone parents. 30% of the women in prison with children are lone parents. And when they come out of prison, and they commit very, very, in most cases, non-violent and trivial crimes, when they come out of prison, of course, they have quite likely lost their children to the care system. And even if they get them back, those children in care are much more likely to commit a crime than those who have not been in care. First of all, it costs more than it costs to send someone in prison than sending them to a private boarding school in the UK. And looking after the children costs infinitely more than even that. So the cost society is enormous. So it helps, being an economist and having an experience of all that, to look at it from the perspective of what should we be doing for the economy as a whole. Clearly, a little bit like what we've been hearing about the refugees, what do people need? They need education, so they don't get to that point. What do people need? They need employment, so they don't get to the point of committing crimes eventually because they've lost the plot, if you like. And what the society needs is a system that allows for all these people not to be a burden on society, but to work and contribute. And there isn't anything that is more effective in reducing crime to society, which costs a huge amount of money, and the reoffending that happens for women as well as men, than making sure they have proper jobs and they can contribute and keep the children themselves. So a complete new look in the way in which we look at the prison system more generally, those vulnerable people. This is what we've supposedly been talking about today as well, about community values. Those people who are vulnerable and who need the help, and who eventually, if they're treated properly, will cost us an awful lot less and make for a much safer society. If you look at it from the economic viewpoint, then it shows very, very clearly that, again, here, a little bit like with the migration system, you need to rethink about how you treat these people from the beginning, in terms of educating them, bring them forward, and ensuring that they have a proper life, not with crime, and you deal also with a lot of the medical and mental problems that they have. So women in particular need attention. The men, lots and lots of men do too, but a rethink of how do we treat what is actually, as I said at the beginning, a majority of the population. My view is that if we know how to treat the majority, we should be able then to really manage all the other minorities which need equal treatment as well. Not necessarily equal treatment, which need special treatment. Because basically, what we're talking about here, and in the migration crisis, is that we can't treat all people equally. We need to realize that there are special needs of everyone. Women at work need something different to men at work, possibly. Migrants need something different to the ones that are there already. And a rethink, which might actually be a win-win for everyone concerned, is what is absolutely essential here. Economics helps considerably because everyone talks about fairness, but if you put it in economic terms, then the case is completely clear. Thank you very much.